The cleaner enters the church and screams. What the groom hears makes him call off the wedding right then and there. Edith Johnson had been cleaning churches for 23 years, but she had never felt her heart beat as fast as it did on that December Saturday. Her hands trembled as she held her old cell phone. The photos and recordings she had kept secret for so many months would finally have a voice. It was when she heard the first notes of the organ echoing through St. Matthew's Church in Denver that she knew she could no longer stay silent. Michael Harris was about to marry Samantha Miller, and she was the only person who knew the truth about who that woman in the white dress really was. "Father Patrick, I need to speak," shouted Edith, bursting through the central aisle of the packed church. The roughly 200 guests turned around in shock. Michael, in a black tuxedo and bow tie, froze at the altar. Samantha, radiant in her lace dress, instantly turned pale. "Edith, what are you doing?" whispered the priest, bewildered. "He can't marry her. Michael, you don't know who this woman is." Edith raised the cell phone with trembling hands. "I have proof of what she did to your sister." The silence that fell over the church was deafening. Michael felt his legs go weak. His sister Rebecca had moved to the countryside 6 months ago, claiming personal problems. Since then, they barely spoke, and whenever he asked about her, Samantha always changed the subject. "What are you talking about?" Michael asked, his voice coming out weaker than he would have liked. Edith walked determinedly toward the altar, her blue cleaner's uniform contrasting with the elegance of the surroundings. At 52, she had seen a lot in that church, but never anything as cruel as what she had witnessed months ago. "Samantha has been blackmailing your sister for almost a year, Michael. She found out that Rebecca is dating a woman and threatened to tell your family if she didn't stay away from you." Samantha tried to speak, but Edith continued, pressing play on an audio recording. The cold voice of the bride echoed through the church via the cell phone speaker. "Your family will never accept this, Rebecca. Imagine what they'll think of Michael when they find out his little sister is a lesbian. I'll tell everyone if you don't disappear from his life. I want him all to myself." A murmur of shock ran through the church pews. Michael's mother, Mrs. Elizabeth, brought her hand to her chest, finally understanding why her daughter had become so distant. His father, Mr. Robert, clenched his fists, trying to control his anger. Michael looked at Samantha with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't love, it wasn't understanding. It was pure disappointment. "Samantha, is this true?" he asked, his voice choked. "Michael, my love, she's lying. This woman is making all this up." Samantha tried to approach, but he took a step back. Edith continued, showing a photo on her cell phone. "I took this picture the day she threatened Rebecca here in the sacristy. Look at the fear on the girl's face, Michael. Your sister left here crying and never came back. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out." Now, continuing, Edith had worked at that church since she was 29. She started right after she was widowed, when she had to support her only daughter, Janitor, on her own. She had seen baptisms, weddings, funerals, confessions. She learned to be discreet, to clean not only the physical dirt, but also to keep the secrets she overheard in the corners. But that secret was weighing too heavily on her conscience. It all began on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before the wedding. Edith was cleaning the sacristy when she heard raised voices coming from behind the altar. She immediately recognized Rebecca's voice, who had been attending the church since she was a child, always accompanied by her older brother. "Please, Samantha, don't do this to me," Rebecca pleaded, her voice breaking with tears. "You're the one doing this to me, Rebecca. I'm going to marry your brother, and I don't want anyone in his family knowing that you're what you are." Edith approached silently, hiding behind a marble column. Rebecca was leaning against the wall, tears streaming down her face. Samantha stared at her with a coldness Edith had never seen in someone about to get married. "My family loves me, Samantha. They'll accept me for who I am." "Are you sure about that?" Samantha laughed cruelly. "Your father is one of those macho men, right? And your mother, so religious. Imagine what they'll think when they find out their little girl is kissing another woman. That's none of your business." "Of course it's my business. I'm going to be part of this family, and I don't want any scandal." So here's what you're going to do. You'll leave Denver, come up with some excuse and disappear from Michael's life. If you do that, I'll keep your little secret." Edith watched Rebecca break down in tears. The 24-year-old, who had always been so strong and determined, seemed to shrink before her future sister-in-law's threats. "And if I don't, then I'll tell everyone. Your parents, your friends, the neighbors, the church folks. I'll spread photos of you and your little girlfriend all over Denver. I have contacts in the local press. I can turn this into a huge scandal." Edith felt her blood run cold. She had known Rebecca since she was a little girl, knew she was a good kid who worked as a teacher in a public school, and loved her family above all else. Seeing someone being blackmailed like that made her think of her own daughter, who lived in Chicago and faced her own challenges. "You can't do this to me, Samantha." "I can, and I will if I have to. You have 1 week to decide. Either disappear from Michael's life, or I'll destroy yours." Rebecca ran out of the sacristy, sobbing loudly. Samantha stood still for a few minutes, fiddling with her phone with a satisfied smile on her face. Edith waited for her to leave before emerging from her hiding spot, her heart racing. In the following days, Edith watched everything with growing attention. She saw Rebecca avoiding her family, making up excuses not to participate in the wedding preparations. She saw the young woman wither away each day, losing weight and her smile, and she saw Samantha pretending to be concerned, offering hypocritical support while putting on even more pressure behind the scenes. It was when Rebecca finally gave in to the blackmail that Edith decided to act. The young teacher showed up at the church on a Thursday, hugged her brother for a long time, and said she had gotten a job in Boulder, in the countryside of Colorado, and needed to move immediately. Michael was bewildered by his sister's sudden decision, but Samantha was quick to support the move, talking about how good it would be for Rebecca to be independent and start a new life. Edith saw the desperation in Rebecca's eyes during that last hug. It was the goodbye of someone being forced to abandon everything they loved. That night, Edith couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her own daughter, Jennifer, who at 28 lived in Chicago working as a nurse. She imagined how she would feel if someone blackmailed her girl, forcing her to stay away from her. That's when she decided she wouldn't let that injustice go. She discreetly started gathering evidence. She recorded conversations when Samantha thought she was alone in the church, talking on the phone with friends about how she had solved the Rebecca problem. She took pictures of the threatening notes Samantha left on the pew where Rebecca usually sat. She even managed to get a copy of the church security footage showing the argument in the sacristy. Edith had been working in cleaning since she was 15 years old. She started as a maid in family homes, then moved on to cleaning offices and finally ended up in churches. She learned that being invisible had its advantages. People would talk in front of her as if she didn't exist, revealing secrets, making unintentional confessions. But she had never used that knowledge to interfere in anyone's life, until now. Samantha continued her desperate denials at the altar, but Edith had more evidence to show. She displayed a photo of Samantha with a man who wasn't Michael, kissing him passionately at a restaurant in downtown Denver. "And there's more, Michael. Your fiancé not only blackmails your sister, but has also been cheating on you for months with Brandon Thompson, the lawyer at the firm where she works." The collective gasp of the guests echoed through the church. Michael felt the world spinning around him. Samantha, desperate, tried to deny it once again. "These are photoshopped. This woman is crazy. Michael, my love, you're not going to believe some random janitor, are you?" The last phrase was like a slap in Michael's face. He had always respected Edith, knowing she was an honest and hard-working person. Seeing Samantha try to discredit her because of her profession showed a side of his fiancée he had never seen before. "Edith has never lied to me, Samantha. Have you lied?" Samantha's silence was more eloquent than any answer. Michael slowly took the ring off his finger and placed it on the altar. The wedding is cancelled. The commotion in the church was instantaneous. Some guests applauded Edith, others were too shocked to react. Samantha ran down the aisle, holding up the hem of her wedding dress, while her parents followed in embarrassment. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. now continuing. 2 weeks after the cancelled wedding, Michael was at the Denver bus station, waiting for the bus that would take him to Boulder. He needed to talk to Rebecca in person to apologize for not realizing what was happening. Edith had insisted on accompanying him. She felt responsible for keeping the secret for so long and wanted to help reunite the siblings. "Mr. Michael, I should have spoken up sooner," said Edith as they boarded the bus, "but I was afraid I was seeing things that weren't there." "You did the right thing, Edith. Imagine if I had married her." The trip to Boulder took 4 hours. Michael spent most of the time in silence, processing everything that had happened. How could he have been so blind? How did he not realize that Samantha was manipulating his family? Rebecca had rented a small, simple house on the outskirts of town and found work at a municipal school. When she saw her brother at the door, accompanied by Edith, her eyes filled with tears. "Mike, what are you doing here?" "I came to take you home, little sister." Rebecca hugged her brother as if she hadn't seen him in years, not just months. It was a hug from someone who had suffered greatly far from those she loved. "Samantha told you, didn't she?" Rebecca asked, still hugging her brother. "She didn't tell us anything. It was Edith who opened our eyes." Rebecca looked at the janitor with gratitude. Edith, always discreet, just smiled and said, "Your family loves you just the way you are, girl. Anyone can see that." In the following days, Rebecca told her family everything. She talked about her girlfriend, Emily, a veterinarian she had met in college. She told them about Samantha's blackmail, about how she felt trapped between protecting her family from the scandal and living her own life. To Rebecca's surprise, her parents' reaction was very different from what Samantha had predicted. Mrs. Elizabeth cried, but with relief for finally understanding why her daughter had distanced herself. Mr. Robert took longer to process the information, but his first concern was for his daughter's happiness. "Are you happy with this young lady?" he asked, straightforward as always. "Very happy, Dad." "Then that's what matters." Edith watched everything from afar, happy to have helped reunite the family. But her mission wasn't completely over yet. She heard from other caretakers in town that Samantha had moved to Chicago, supposedly to start over. Brandon Thompson, the lawyer she was having the affair with, had also resigned from the firm after the scandal. What Edith didn't expect was to receive a call from her own daughter, Jennifer, a few weeks later. "Mum, you won't believe what happened here." "What is it, my dear?" "Remember I told you about that new colleague at the hospital? Amanda, something. She tried to cause trouble for one of the senior nurses, spread lies about her stealing medication." Edith felt a chill down her spine. "What does she look like, Jennifer?" "Blonde, pretty, says she's from Denver. Why are you asking?" Edith quickly told the story to her daughter, who was shocked to realize she was working with the same woman who had caused so much suffering to Michael's family. "Mum, I'll keep an eye on her. If she tries to do anything to anyone here, I won't let it happen." Edith smiled with pride at her daughter. Courage was sometimes hereditary. Meanwhile, in Denver, the Harris family's life was getting back on track. Rebecca had returned to town and brought Emily to meet the family. The veterinarian proved to be a caring and respectful person, quickly winning the affection of Mrs. Elizabeth and even the cautious approval of Mr. Robert. Michael was recovering emotionally from the relationship with Samantha. Discovering he had been manipulated and betrayed was a hard blow, but the support of his family and the truth revealed by Edith helped him understand it wasn't his fault. "Edith, how can I thank you?" he asked one afternoon, finding the caretaker cleaning the pews of the church. "You don't need to thank me, my dear. I just did what any decent person would do." "Not everyone would have had your courage." Edith stopped cleaning and looked at Michael with maternal affection. "You know, Mr. Michael, I've worked here for over 20 years. I've seen a lot of good and a lot of bad happen in this church. I've learned that sometimes God puts people in the right place at the right time to make a difference. Do you think that's what happened?" "I think I was here at the right time to protect your family, and your sister needed protection." Michael nodded, understanding. Edith had truly been a guardian angel for his family. 3 months after the cancelled wedding, St. Matthew's Church was the setting for a new celebration. Rebecca and Emily decided to have a civil union ceremony at the church, with Father Patrick's blessing and the presence of the whole family. Edith took extra care cleaning the church that day. She polished every pew, every window, every detail of the altar. Seeing that family together and happy was the greatest reward she could have. During the ceremony, Michael gave an emotional speech about the importance of truth and courage. He publicly thanked Edith, calling her our family's angel. Edith, always discreet, tried to stay at the back of the church, but Rebecca insisted on calling her to the front. "This woman saved our family," Rebecca said, hugging Edith in front of all the guests. "She had the courage to speak when all of us were blind." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Edith Johnson's life changed subtly after the events of the cancelled wedding. Although she continued working as a caretaker at the church, her unofficial role as a confidant and advisor expanded. People from the community began seeking her out for conversations, knowing they would find a listening ear and sensible advice. Father Patrick, recognizing Edith's natural gift for helping people, invited her to coordinate a support group for women in the community facing difficult situations. Edith accepted hesitantly, but soon discovered she had a talent for organizing and leading the meetings. The group met every Thursday evening in the parish hall. Women of all ages and situations came: single mothers, betrayed wives, lonely elderly women, young women with family problems. Edith learned that every story of suffering was unique, but that the act of sharing and being heard was universally healing. One of the first participants was Mrs. Margaret, a 68-year-old lady who was being emotionally manipulated by her youngest son. He had lost his job 2 years earlier and had since been living off his retired mother, spending her small pension on alcohol and gambling. "He says nobody wants to hire him because of his age," Mrs. Margaret shared in one of the meetings, "but I see him at the bar every day, spending the money I scraped together." Edith listened patiently, along with the other women in the group. She had learned that sometimes people just needed to talk, to be heard without judgment. "Mrs. Margaret, have you tried talking to him about this?" Edith asked gently. "He always makes excuses, says he's depressed, that he needs to drink to forget his problems. I feel sorry for him." "Do you have other children?" "I have 3 sons, but the other 2 got tired of helping their brother. They say he needs to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. Edith understood the situation. As a mother, she knew how difficult it was to set boundaries with children, especially when they were going through hard times. But she also knew that sometimes overprotecting could do more harm than good. Over the following weeks, Edith worked with Mrs. Margaret to develop strategies for dealing with her son. It wasn't about abandoning him, but about helping him more effectively. The first step was for Mrs. Margaret to reach out to her other sons for a family conversation. Edith suggested the meeting take place at the ladies' house, on a Sunday after lunch when everyone would be present. "You need to understand it's not abandonment," Edith explained. "It's responsible love. Sometimes, to help someone, we need to let that person face the consequences of their choices." The conversation was difficult but productive. The 3 older sons agreed to help create a support plan that included medical follow-up for their younger brother's addiction, but also established clear boundaries about financial support. It took Mrs. Margaret 2 more months to implement the plan, but when she did, it was with the full support of Edith's group and her family. The youngest son initially reacted badly, but eventually sought help for his alcohol problems and found a new job. "Edith, I don't know how to thank you," Mrs. Margaret said at a meeting months later. "You taught me that loving doesn't always mean saying yes." Stories like this multiplied. Edith's group grew from 5 to 15, then to 25 women. Father Patrick had to find a larger space for the meetings. One of the stories that touched Edith the most was that of Brittany, a 22-year-old young woman in an abusive relationship. Unlike Samantha's sophisticated manipulations, Brittany's boyfriend used more direct tactics. He isolated her from friends, controlled her money, and humiliated her publicly. "He says he loves me," Brittany shared at a meeting, her eyes always downcast, "that he only gets angry because he worries about me." Edith recognized the signs immediately. Although she had never been in an abusive relationship herself, she had seen similar cases throughout her life and learned to identify the patterns. "Brittany, love isn't control," Edith said softly. "Love is freedom, it's trust, it's respect. But he says other people don't know me like he knows me. And you, how do you feel when you're with him?" Brittany took a long time to answer. "Tired, always afraid of doing something wrong." Edith worked with Brittany twice a week, in addition to the group meetings. She helped her rebuild the support network she had lost, to reconnect with family and friends. More importantly, she helped her regain her self-esteem and confidence in her own judgment. The process took almost a year, but eventually Brittany found the strength to end the abusive relationship. Edith accompanied her the day she went to get her things from her ex-boyfriend's house, making sure she wasn't alone. "Edith, you saved my life," Brittany said, hugging the caretaker after everything was over. "You saved your own life, my child. I just reminded you that you were strong enough for this." These experiences profoundly changed Edith's view of herself and her role in the world. For decades, she had seen herself only as a humble worker, someone who cleaned up other people's messes and kept things running behind the scenes. Now she realized that her true calling might be this: to help clean up not just physical dirt, but also the complicated situations in people's lives. Her ability to observe, listen, and act at the right moment had saved Michael's family and was now helping dozens of other women. Father Patrick, observing the impact of Edith's work, suggested she take a pastoral counseling course. Edith initially hesitated, thinking she didn't have enough formal education, but the priest insisted, "Edith, you have something you can't learn in school: genuine wisdom and compassion. The course will just give you tools for what you already do naturally." Edith enrolled in the night course offered by the diocese. 3 times a week after her work at the church, she studied basic psychology, counseling techniques, and pastoral theology. It was challenging for someone who had stopped studying at 15, but Edith was determined. Her daughter Jennifer fully supported her, calling every week to hear about her studies and offer encouragement. The two had always been close, but this new phase in Edith's life brought them even closer. "Mom, I always knew you had a special gift for helping people," Jennifer said during one of their phone conversations. "Now you're just learning how to use that gift even more effectively." It was during the course that Edith began to better understand her own story. She had always been resilient, but she had never stopped to think about how her life experiences had prepared her to help others. Losing her husband at 29 and raising a daughter alone taught her about strength and perseverance. Working in positions where she was often invisible taught her about observation and discretion. Facing financial difficulties taught her about priorities and resources. Every challenge she had overcome became a tool to help other people facing similar situations. During the second year of the course, Edith met other women who did similar work in their communities. They formed an informal support network, sharing experiences and strategies. One of them was Barbara, a former teacher who coordinated a support group for at-risk teenagers. Another was Catherine, who worked with women who were victims of domestic violence. Together, they began organizing workshops and talks on topics like self-esteem, healthy relationships, and conflict resolution. Edith became an expert in cases of emotional manipulation and blackmail, drawing from her experience with Rebecca and Samantha's situation, but also from many similar cases she had handled since then. She developed her own method to help people in these situations. First, she validated the person's feelings, acknowledging that emotional manipulation leaves real scars. Then, she helped the person identify the manipulator's behavioral patterns. Finally, she worked with the person to develop practical strategies for protection and recovery. Edith's method proved so effective that other support groups in the region began asking her to give talks and workshops on the topic. 3 years after Michael's cancelled wedding, Edith was speaking at a diocesan conference on lay ministry. Her presentation was titled, "The Courage to Break the Silence: How Small Acts of Courage Can Transform Lives." In the audience was the Archbishop of Denver, who was impressed with Edith's work and invited her to expand her support groups to other parishes in the Archdiocese. "Edith, you've developed something special here," said the Archbishop after the talk. "This work needs to reach more people." Edith accepted the challenge, though she knew it would mean even more responsibility. She began traveling throughout the Denver metropolitan area, helping other parishes establish support groups similar to hers. In every place she visited, Edith found stories similar to those she already knew. Women being manipulated, families being destroyed by lies, people suffering in silence because they didn't know where to turn. But she also found stories of hope, people who had found the strength to change their situations, families that had reunited after misunderstandings, relationships that had been healed through honest communication. One of the stories that touched her most was that of a 55-year-old woman named Patricia, who discovered that her husband of 30 years was having an affair with a co-worker 20 years younger. "I feel so foolish," Patricia shared at the first meeting she attended. "How could I not have noticed? The signs were all there." Edith worked with Patricia over several months, helping her not only deal with the betrayal, but also rediscover her own identity after decades of defining herself primarily as a wife and mother. The process included difficult conversations with her husband, mediated by Edith, where it became clear that the marriage had been lost over the years, long before the affair happened. Eventually, Patricia decided on divorce, but she made this choice from a position of strength, not despair. "Edith, you helped me discover that I am a complete person, not just half of a couple," Patricia said months later. "For the first time in decades, I feel free to be myself." Stories like this multiplied, each one unique, but all connected by the common thread of suffering transformed into growth through support and understanding. Edith came to be known throughout the region as the caretaker who saves families. The title made her uncomfortable at times because she felt it exaggerated her role, but it also made her proud as it showed how humble people could make significant differences in others' lives. 5 years after interrupting Michael's wedding, Edith was invited to a special meeting at St. Matthew's Church. When she arrived, she found a surprise. Michael, Rebecca, Emily, and dozens of people who had been helped by her support groups over the years. "Edith, we organized this to celebrate 5 years of courage," said Michael, emotional. 5 years since you changed our lives." What Edith saw in the church that night was more beautiful than any wedding she had ever attended. Mrs. Margaret was there with her 4 children, including the youngest, who had completed 2 years of sobriety. Brittany was present with her new boyfriend, a man who treated her with the respect she deserved. Patricia had brought her 2 daughters, who had supported her during the divorce and helped her rebuild her life. There were also people Edith didn't even know had been impacted by her work. Friends and family members of the women who attended the groups, who had learned about healthy relationships and honest communication through the lessons their wives, mothers, and sisters brought home. Father Patrick gave a speech about how Edith's work had transformed not just individual lives, but the entire parish community. People were more willing to seek help when they needed it, more open to offering support to others, more courageous in facing difficult situations. "Edith, you taught us that courage isn't the absence of fear," said the priest. "It's doing the right thing despite the fear." Edith, always emotional but controlled, couldn't hold back her tears. Seeing so many lives transformed, so many families reunited, so much suffering turned into growth was more rewarding than any official recognition could ever be. Rebecca approached her with a gift, a photo album documenting Edith's 5 years of work. There were photos of support groups, lectures, workshops, but mostly photos of people smiling, hugging, celebrating small and big achievements. "Edith, you didn't just save our family," said Rebecca. "You taught us that all families can be saved when there's true love and courage to face the truth." The last photo in the album showed St. Matthew's Church on a Sunday morning with pews full of families of all configurations. Traditional couples, single mothers, blended families, elderly people, young couples. It was a picture of genuine community where diversity was celebrated and mutual support was the norm. Edith closed the album and looked at all those people who had become her extended family. She thought about her journey from that afternoon when she heard Samantha blackmail Rebecca to this moment of celebration. The courage to break the silence had multiplied. Every person she helped had become a little braver, a little more willing to act when they saw injustice, a little more able to offer support to others in need. Edith realized that her true calling had never been just cleaning the church. It was cleaning up situations in people's lives, sweeping away lies and manipulations, polishing relationships until they shone again with honesty and genuine love. At 57, Edith Johnson had found her purpose, and that purpose was spreading throughout Denver, one courageous conversation at a time. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of the story and where you're listening from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Edith made the right decision? We'd love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.